After discussing confidence intervals, we are now in Unit 8 of our Statistics OER course, which is a topic on hypothesis testing with one population and one sample from that single population. As a reference, in the Introduction to Statistics Corequisite Lumen book, we are in Module 9 for hypothesis testing with one sample. And in the Introductory Statistics by OpenStax, we are also in Module 9, the hypothesis testing with one sample, and we will start today with null and alternative hypotheses. So, the actual test that you will be doing will begin by considering two hypotheses, the assumption and the complement or the negation of that assumption. The assumption is called the null hypothesis and the symbol is H sub 0, hypothesis 0. And the complement, which is the opposite or the negation, is called the alternative hypothesis and it has the symbol H sub A, hypothesis alternative. The null hypothesis is a statement of no difference between the variables, they are not related, and this can often be considered the status quo. And as a result, if you cannot accept the null, it requires some action. The alternative hypothesis is a claim about the population that is contradictory to the null hypothesis. And what we are actually plan to conclude when we reject the null hypothesis. This is usually what you, as the researcher, is trying to prove. However, you have not established the alternative hypothesis. The null hypothesis is a statement that says that there is no difference, no difference expected, nothing significant expected, everything is as it is currently assumed to be. So, you do have more evidence that the null hypothesis exists before you start your study. Your job is to examine evidence to decide whether or not you have enough data to reject the null hypothesis. And the evidence will come from your sample data. So you have a status quo, which is the null hypothesis, and you will collect your evidence, which is sample data. And if that sample data evidence is very unlikely to occur based on your hypothesis, on the null hypothesis, then you have enough evidence to reject the null hypothesis. So you collect data, you compare the data based to the null hypothesis, and then you will make a decision. Your decision has two only forms. You will either decide to reject the null hypothesis or you will fail to reject the null hypothesis. Remember that the alternative hypothesis does not exist. You are trying to prove it. So the only thing that exists is the null hypothesis, and you will either reject it or you will have enough evidence to reject it, or you were not able to find enough evidence to reject it. Another thing that we need to know is that when we write the hypothesis, the null hypothesis will always have the symbol equal in it. So the choice of the symbols depends on the word problem, but the null hypothesis will either have, will compare numerical values, and it will either have the equal symbol or the greater with the equal symbol or the less than with the equal symbol. If your null hypothesis has the equal symbol, the alternative hypothesis could be not equal to, it could be greater or it could be less. If your null hypothesis is greater than or equal, then your alternative hypothesis will be less than. And if your null hypothesis is less than or equal, then your alternative hypothesis will be greater than. So remember that the alternative hypothesis is the negation, the opposite of the null hypothesis. So let's try to come up with the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis for these problems. No more than 30% of the registered voters in Santa Clara County voted in the primary election. State the null and alternative hypotheses. So, no more than 30% means, actually this should be two dots, not equals. It will be an expression that will have an equal sign. So it will be that the proportion of registered voters in Santa Clara County is no more than 30%, so less than or equal to 30%. Also, you could write that as a decimal, which is preferred because you want to do math with numbers. So we prefer the proportions to be written as decimals. And then the alternative hypothesis is that more than 30% of registered voters voted in the primary election. We want to test whether the mean GPA of students in American colleges is different from 2.0. Your goal is the alternative hypothesis. So the different that doesn't have the equal sign is the alternative hypothesis. What is the null hypothesis? The null hypothesis will be that we will assume that the mean GPA of students in American colleges, this is the mean of the population of students in American colleges, is actually equal to 2.0. And then your alternative is what you are trying to prove, which is that the mean is different from 2.0, so not equal to. Another example, we want to test if it takes fewer than 45 minutes to teach a lesson plan. So my goal is fewer than 45 minutes. That's the alternative hypothesis. So I'm going to assume the null hypothesis will be that the mean time it will take me to complete a lesson plan is greater than or equal to 45 minutes. And then I'm going to collect evidence to see if I can claim that the mean will be less than 45 minutes. So for this section, the glossary is what is a hypothesis and how hypothesis testing will work, which is to determine the null and alternative hypothesis and state them correctly. After that, we will begin our hypothesis test, which will be based on data collected.